Morning. My name is Jenifer Schaye, and I'm the General Counsel for the Legislative Auditor. I'm pleased to be that because I'm pleased to help you, the auditor, and you participate in making government more transparent and accountable. And before I introduce everybody and I'd like to say thank you to you. Thank you to all of you who are working hard for transparency and accountability in Louisiana government. I get the privilege of speaking with many of you on a regular basis, and I'm always impressed at the conscientious work and the selfless work that so many of you do. And we're happy to be able today to present to you something that I know is very important to your various communities, and that is setting millage rates and getting the proper money so that government can function in our state. And Joanne Garrison, who's our tax review officer, who will be our main presenter today, does a great job, not only today, but all through the year, of walking you and me and lots of other people through what can be a complex millage process. I'm also happy to say that a senior attorney who works with me, Patrick Virgadamo, will be here to give you some real insights into the open meetings law, especially how it affects the millage process. But we couldn't do any of this without the support first of the legislative auditor himself, Mike Wagasback, who's encouraged us to continue these presentations even in the midst of all the change that we've had since March of 20. And we thank Mr. Wagasback for that and for his leadership in our organization. I also like to thank Lizzie Shakesnyder, who is our training director, who has just done a marvelous job of helping us to adapt with the technology. And she's being backed and worked with by Craig Wiseman in our IT group, and Megan Kelly, who is assisting her all the time in making sure there's no flaws in these presentations. I saw all the evaluations from the last presentation, and they were great. And I'm hoping that you will also think this is great. We are here to serve you. We see ourselves as servant leaders, as you do. And so know that if you hear something today, Joanne will be giving you her number, but you can always call the legal group, which is at 225-339-3871. And we want to work with you and walk with you through the process. So with that, I hope you have a great morning. Hope you learn a whole lot of things and that you're more equipped at noon today than you are right now. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in the workshop today. I hope the weather is not too bad where you are. It's storming here in Baton Rouge, but it's not going to keep us from having a good workshop today. If for some reason you lose power today and the workshop gets cut off, just know that we are recording the workshops and we'll make them available on the Legislative Auditor's website as soon as possible. So don't worry if you do lose power, the workshop will be made available. While we're sorry we can't be there in person with you, we are thankful for the technology that allows us to bring these workshops to you virtually. Hopefully next year we'll be able to get on the road again and get out there to see you. I'm looking forward to that because I really do enjoy visiting with you and getting to know you better, and just getting out on the road, getting out on the office. That's one of the highlights of my year, is getting out there to see you. Like Jenifer, I'd like to thank all of those people that she named. They're vital in organizing and developing these webinars. I couldn't do it by myself. It's a lot of work put into it. I'd also like to thank Pam Mixon, our executive legal assistant. She helped me put the PowerPoint together and reviewed and edited that for me. So she was essential in getting that together as well. I'd like to thank Jenifer for her part in the workshop as well. Before we get started, I want to mention that you will need a copy of the Setting Millage Rates book. That's available on our website. If you don't already have a copy of it, that's available on our website. You can go out there now and either print a copy of that or get one electronically. Just look at it electronically. You will need a copy of that as we move through the presentation today. But if you can't find it, that's fine as well. Just know that provides all of the information that we're going to go through, used during the presentation. As we move through the presentation, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. Just submit them as we go through. We do plan to take a 15-minute break midway through the presentation. At that time, we'll answer the questions that have come in up to that point. And then toward the end of the presentation, we'll stop, right before noon and answer the questions that have come in since the break. As noted in the invitation that was on the website, continuing professional education credit is not being offered for this workshop, but your governing agency may give you that credit. So if you would like a confirmation of your attendance, we can provide that for you as long as you stay logged in as an individual. You have to be individually logged in to the workshop and you remain logged in the entire time. We can provide you with a confirmation of attendance if you email me. And most of you probably have my email address, but if not, my contact information will be at the end of the PowerPoint, and then it will also be at the end of the Setting Millage Rates book that you will have. I've just been handed a note that the book is also available in the chat feature on the PowerPoint, so you'll find it there as well. The PowerPoint that's on your screen is just a guide of the topics that we're going to be discussing today, but neither it nor the Setting Millage Rates book is really meant to be all-inclusive. So if you come across a topic as you're adopting your millage rates, please feel free to reach out to me or to our legal department, and we will be more than happy to go over those and discuss those and work out whatever issues you're coming across and get those resolved for you. Your Setting Millage Rates book, you'll see that some of the information in that book is repetitive. The book is designed so that the user doesn't have to flip pages back and forth from one section to the other, depending on what action they plan to take in their millage adoption. After the taxing district has decided what action they're going to take in a particular year, meaning are they going to roll forward, meaning increase their taxes, or they are not going to roll forward, they would just go to that one section of the Setting Millage Rates book, and all the information they would need would be in that one section. There's no requirement to have to flip back and forth. It's just simpler for the taxing district if it's all in that one section of the book. Now the books are a little bit different. Some of you will have a book dated February of 2022. Others of you will have a book dated March 15th of 2022. The information in the books are the same. The only difference is since the governor did not extend that emergency proclamation related to COVID-19, the Setting Millage Rates book had to be updated to remove the information about the exception in the proclamation that the proclamation allowed. All of the other information is the same. However, some of those of you with the book dated February of 2022 will need to make a note of the updated materials. Don't worry about that right now. I'll let you know when we come across that information where it's found and where you can make the note. Those of you with the book dated March the 15th of 2022 will see the referenced update at the beginning of the book. So after the title page, the second page will give you the referenced update. and then you'll see it noted in each spot as well. So those of you that have the February book, I will give you the information on where to make the note. So, and you can update that as we go along. Patrick Virgadamo, who is one of our senior attorneys, he's going to come a little bit later and discuss the open meetings law with you. And he is going to provide more detailed information on the impact of that expiration of the governor's emergency proclamation on that COVID impact to the open meetings law. So be sure and pay close attention to when Patrick comes to his presentation, and submit any questions that you have pertaining to the open meetings law to Patrick if you need more clarity on that. He's going to stay with us through that section, through the break, to answer questions pertaining to the open meetings law, and then he will come back toward the end of the presentation if you happen to think of any later that would apply strictly to your taxing district. So with that being, we're going to go ahead and get started. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We ask that you don't put them in the chat box. That's not a box that I am monitoring. That's one that the coordinator is monitoring. So we ask that you put them in the Q&A box. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started on the definitions, which is on page 3 of your Setting Millage Rates book. You'll have to excuse me, I have a little sinus issue today, but we're going to get through it. Now, we're not going to go over all of these definitions. These are just the terms that will be used throughout the millage process. So again, we're not going to go over all these definitions. Some of them, you can read yourself in the Setting Millage Rates book, but there's others that need more explanation that we'll provide. The first one is the actual levy. It's also known as the authorized rate. It's the millage rate levied and collected in a particular year. So it's the rate that you as a taxing district is going to annually adopt in your public meeting. It's the rate that after you adopt it, it's going to make its way to the tax roll, and then it's going to make its way to the tax bills. So it is the actual levy, it's the millage rate that the taxing districts adopt in a public meeting. Ad valorem means according to value. Taxes are assessed a dollar amount according to the property values within a parish. And then we're going to skip down to those terms: adjusted maximum millage rate and maximum authorized millage rate. You'll see that term adjusted is bolded and underlined, and the term maximum is bolded and underlined. Those two definitions work together in the roll forward process. So you want to pay close attention to those two definitions. The adjusted maximum millage rate is the maximum authorized rate as adjusted by reassessment. If the actual levy and the maximum authorized levy are different, both rates are going to be adjusted by reassessment. And then this last one you may want to highlight. Any rate up to and including the adjusted maximum millage may be levied without going through the roll forward process. So in the roll forward process, the adjusted rate will be the lower rate. So you may want to make a note of that. The adjusted maximum millage rate, when reassessment occurs and there is an increase in property values, the adjusted maximum millage rate will be lower in order to generate the same revenue as the prior year. And the taxing district can levy any millage rate up to that adjusted maximum millage without rolling forward. So again, that lower rate, that adjusted maximum millage rate will be lower when there is an increase in property value. Okay? And then the maximum authorized millage, it is the millage rate approved by voters before reassessment has occurred on that rate. So if you have a new tax or a renewed tax, and it has not gone through reassessment, well then that is your maximum authorized millage until it goes through reassessment. The millage rate as adjusted by reassessment if there is a decrease in property value. So if there is a decrease in property value, generally the adjusted maximum and the maximum are the same rate. Because if there is a decrease in property value, you're only going to be able to receive the same revenue as the prior year. And then the maximum authorized millage is the prior year's maximum after reassessment if there is an increase in property values. Because if there is an increase in property values and you levy the same rate as last year, that's going to generate more money, more revenue. And then you may want to highlight that last bullet. The prior year's maximum will only be available until the next reassessment occurs. The prior year's maximum will only be available until the next reassessment occurs. So in the roll forward process, the maximum authorized millage rate is the higher rate when there is an increase in property value. You have to roll forward to obtain any rate over the adjusted maximum millage up to the maximum authorized millage. We're going to have a lot more information on those two terms in the roll forward section of the book. If you'll look at page 4 of your Setting Millage Rates book, the pro se verbal is just a written report of any proceeding or an election that you have. Reassessment is also known as reappraisal. That re is underlined because you cannot have reassessment or reappraisal until it goes through the first appraisal or the first assessment. Reassessment is the process mandated by the Louisiana Constitution to be revalued all property subject to taxation. So it is mandated by the Constitution. And reassessment adjusts the millage rate either upward or downward depending on your property values. And the purpose of it is to keep the total amount of ad valorem taxes collected by the taxing authority the same as the preceding year. So that's why there is an increase and decrease in property values. If there is a decrease, again, the rates are usually the same. The adjusted rate and the maximum rate are usually the same to ensure the taxing district the same revenue as the prior year. And then you might want to highlight that statement that says bond millages are not affected by reassessment. And then the last definition is roll forward. When you roll forward, increasing the millage rates after reassessment from the adjusted maximum millage rate up to the rate not in excess of the prior year's maximum. So we discussed that already, just touched on it. When you're rolling forward from the adjusted maximum millage, which is the lower rate, to any rate up to the prior year's maximum, which we've already made clear that the prior year's maximum is also known now as the maximum authorized millage. And a roll forward only occurs when there is an increase in property values. One thing you might want to make a note of is whenever you roll forward, you are increasing revenue, therefore you are also increasing taxes. All right. The next section we're going to go through are the laws. And that is found on page 5 in your Setting Millage Rates book. Article 7, Section 18F of the Louisiana Constitution mandates reassessment. It requires all property subject to taxation to be reappraised at least once every 4 years. Now you may want to highlight or underline or whatever you need to do that at least once every 4 years. There are provisions that allow reassessment to occur more often, but the statewide reassessment will occur at least once every 4 years. So the next statewide reassessment, as of right now, will be 2024. But again, there are provisions that allow the assessors to call it, and there are provisions that allow the Louisiana Tax Commission to call it. In any year outside of the statewide reassessment. Article 7, Section 23B mandates the adjustment of ad valorem taxes either upward or downward depending on property values. So Article 7, Section 18F mandates reassessment. Article 7, Section 23B mandates the adjustment of the millage rates. And then C authorizes the increases of those millage rates after reassessment, but not in excess of the prior year's maximum. That authorizes you, the taxing district, to roll forward to capture that higher millage rate. So if a person comes to you, a taxpayer comes to you and asks you, what gives you, the taxing district, the authority to increase my property taxes? Article 7, Section 23C is your answer. Article 7, Section 23C of the Louisiana Constitution gives the taxing districts the authority to roll forward. And then Article 7, Section 23D states that reassessment does not apply to millage rates being levied toward general obligation bonds. Whenever you have a bond, you need to get the property values from the assessor. You need to know what payment is required for your general obligation in that year. You would look at your repayment schedule, and you would take those two amounts and do the calculation yourself. As the taxing district, you need to do the calculation yourself and calculate the millage rate needed to service that debt for 1 year. Article 7, Section, Revised Statute 47, 1705A requires all tax recipient by agencies of ad valorem taxes of every parish, excluding Orleans, to adopt an ordinance or resolution each year of the millage rate to be applied to the assessed values. The authorizing ordinances or resolutions are to be furnished to the assessor and the legislative auditor no later than June 1st of each year and no later than September 1 of each year for St. Charles Parish. And then if you look down at Revised Statute 11, Section 1481, it says the same information except it does not exclude Orleans Parish. So Orleans Parish has to submit their resolutions and ordinance in the same manner as the rest of the state. These two statutes provide a lot of information that you, the taxing district, need to keep in mind. You have to adopt an ordinance or resolution each year with your millage rates. Those resolutions or ordinance, your millage documents, all of your millage documents, should be turned in to the legislative auditor and the assessor no later than June 1st of each year or September 1 for St. Charles Parish. Now it says turned into the assessor and the legislative auditor. We would like for you to submit them to the assessor, who will then submit them to the legislative auditor. There's no reason for you to submit them to both. If you submit them to the assessor will then forward them to our office. That keeps everyone in the loop as to who has submitted what documents. There is a deadline of June 1st for every parish, excluding St. Charles. There's an AG opinion that allows the assessors to waive the June 1st deadline. There is no AG opinion that allows the September 1st deadline to be waived. This year in 2022, as far as I know as of today, I'm not aware of reassessment occurring in any parish. So you really could start your millage adoption now and have your documents turned in by June 1st or soon thereafter. I mean, their reassessment's not occurring. Now, in a year of reassessment, it's pretty difficult to have your millage documents turned in by June 1st. But in a year that reassessment is not occurring, June 1st is usually, normally attainable. September 1 for St. Charles Parish is attainable. And since that has been enacted, St. Charles Parish has met that deadline. Revised Statute 47, 1705B. This is the statute that provides all the requirements for rolling forward. It authorizes millage increases in millage rates after reassessment to millage rates not exceeding the prior year's maximum and sets forth additional notice requirements. So if you're a taxing district that has rolled forward in the past, you know there are quite a few notice requirements when you're rolling forward, and we're going to go over those after the break. Revised Statute 47-1705.1A. The provisions of this section shall apply to any parish, and you see that any parish is underlined, with a population between 230,000 and 250,000 according to the most recent decennial census. Oh, excuse me, I jumped ahead of myself. If you turn to page 6, Revised Statute 47-1705.1B requires public hearings and meetings for all non-elected taxing authorities. You may want to underline that, non-elected taxing authorities, which are subject to the provisions of 47-1705.1A. So that's the 230,000 to 250,000 population. With respect to increases in millage rates without further voter approval, to be held at the usual meeting location of the parish governing authority. This includes meetings at which a vote is to be taken on the proposed millage rate increase for the ensuing year. So if a non-elected taxing authority in a parish with that population requirement plans to roll forward, they're required to coordinate that with the parish governing authority. At this time, we don't know what parishes that qualifies for because there was a census in 2020. If you feel like that is one of your parishes, I suggest that you contact your assessor or pay attention to the legislative session. But that is in law now. That's something that if you feel like your parish may meet those population requirements, you will need to contact your parish governing authority, the assessor, and keep an eye on the legislative session. Revised Statute 47, Section 1993. Municipalities that prepare their own tax rolls and assessment lists upon approval of these rolls by the parish governing authorities as boards of reviewers shall prepare and submit to the Louisiana Tax Commission and the legislative auditor its millage rates. So municipalities are also required to adopt their millage rates and their documents in the same manner as the parishes. This has been in effect since I have been in this position and long before that, but I just added this to the book so that municipalities will be aware that they have the same requirements as the parish has. Okay. Now the next statute is Revised Statute 4211 through 28. That is the open meetings law. So we're going to skip 11 through 28. Patrick Virgadamo is going to come in a few minutes and go over that with you in detail. So we're not going to spend any time on that, as well as Revised Statute 44, Section 36F, because that applies to 4223, which is part of the open meetings law. So if you will turn to page 7 in your Setting Millage Rates book. Revised Statute 18, Section 1285. It was amended by Act 283 of the 2012 regular session. It provides that a notice of election be given. If the notice is relative to an election which affects ad valorem taxes, the notice of election shall also state that a portion of the monies collected shall be remitted to certain state and statewide retirement systems in the manner required by law. So let me stop right here and just make this statement that the Secretary of State's office is in charge of all elections. The Legislative Auditor's Office has no authority over the actual election. This site is included in the book and in the workshop because the Legislative Auditor's Office gets involved after the election, after your ad valorem tax has been voter approved. And we have to have a copy of that notice of election, which must be included in your proce verbal. And we need the most accurate information to be included in that document, and a notice of an election is required to be included in that procès verbal. So I just wanted to make that disclosure here that the legislative auditor is not involved in the actual election. That if you have any questions on the actual election, you would need to contact the Secretary of State's office. Revised Statute 18, Section 1293 provides that the governing authority ordering the election shall preserve that procès verbal. So you are required, if you're going to have an election, to create that procès verbal, and that's just a document, a written report about what occurred in that election. If the election affects ad valorem taxes, which are your millage rates, the governing authority shall include a copy of that notice of election and a proof of publication of the notice in the procès verbal. So again, we need those procès verbals to be as accurate as possible. The governing authority shall then forward a copy of the procès verbal to the Secretary of State's office, who shall record it. So you are required to submit the recordation of the Secretary of State with your procès verbal. And then going on down, the full faith and credit of a political subdivision is hereby pledged to the payment of a general obligation bond issued by it under this Constitution or the statute or proceedings pursuant to which they are issued. The governing authority of the issuing political subdivision shall levy and collect or cause to be levied and collected on all taxable property in the political subdivision ad valorem taxes sufficient to pay interest, principal and interest on such bonds as they mature. So if you have general obligation bonds, you want to be careful with your bonds that you're not over collecting or under collecting. You want to stay on top of those bonds to be sure that you're levying a millage rate to service that debt as they mature. That's a key term there. You may want to underline that in that statute. As they mature. You should not be over collecting or under collecting. It's very important that you calculate these bonds and recalculate these bonds annually. Revised Statute 24.513.0 requires the legislative auditor to annually review, calculate, and certify the amounts due to each public retirement system as provided by law. These reports are known as the pension reports. It also requires the legislative auditor to submit to each sheriff or tax collector a report setting forth the certified amounts due from each tax recipient body to each public retirement system. So once we receive the tax rolls from the assessor will submit at the end of the year, the assessors will submit their tax roll to the Louisiana Tax Commission, who will certify that roll. And then once the legislative auditor receives a copy of that certified roll, we will use that by law. We have to use that certified tax roll to calculate and certify the amounts due to each public retirement system. And a portion of the proceeds coming off of your ad valorem taxes is pulled to go to their public retirement systems. Revised Statute 13, Section 5565, it requires that the sheriff or tax collector to deduct the amount certified by the legislative auditor and remit those amounts to the retirement systems. Those requirements are in statute. The reports are available on our website now for 2021. So you could go out there and look at the reports for your parish and look at your taxes if you were interested in knowing. You probably received a statement from the sheriff or the tax collector in your parish, but they are out there now if you'd like to go out there and look at them. The next section we're going to go over are the AG opinions. These are just some of the same AG opinions that we've gone over in the past, but they're relevant to the ad valorem tax process. There are a lot of AG opinions on the Attorney General's website pertaining to the ad valorem process, and millage adoption. You could go out there and search their website if you wanted, if you had a specific area that you needed some guidance on. There may already be an opinion out there. But AG opinion number 89526, they opine that reassessment can be done in any year to compensate for decreases in assessed value of public service or personal property. So this opinion was sought after there was a significant decrease in a parish, and the assessor needed to do reassessment so that the taxing districts within that parish would not lose revenue. And the AG opined that yes, only on public service and personal property could they do reassessment. So they, again, the assessor can call reassessment in any year outside of the statewide reassessment, especially if there is a decrease in property value and they need to ensure that the taxing districts receive the same amount of revenue as the prior year. AG opinion number 06-0107. Reassessment cannot be done to compensate for a value loss in real estate due to the transfer of property to the tax exempt roll. Now I went back and reread this opinion. I wanted to be sure that I was giving the correct example of, or the correct scenario behind this opinion. It actually was requested because there were 3 properties in a particular parish being placed on the exempt tax roll, and removing that large of a taxable assessed value was going to cause the other taxing districts to lose a great deal of revenue. But by placing those properties on the tax exempt roll, I mean, they were already on the tax roll. By placing those properties on the tax exempt roll, the AG opined that no, that was not reason. They didn't actually lose property value. They were just placing them on the tax exempt roll. And so no, that was not reason to do reassessment. He did opine that the taxing districts that had not already rolled forward could do so, which, I mean, that's stated in the Constitution, so that was already known that they could do that. AG opinion number 93-339. It just gives more clarity on that term prior year's maximum. AG opinion number 00245 and 245A. It gives more clarity on the roll forward. And then AG opinion 08-257. It discusses subsequent hearings and subsequent meetings. A public hearing to consider an increase in ad valorem tax millage pursuant to revised statute 47-1705B, which is the statute that provides all the roll forward requirements, that has been properly advertised by a public authority, may be rescheduled to a later date without additional publications. Now, one thing you need to note in your book is at the time of this AG opinion, hurricanes had come through, taxing district had advertised to roll forward, and their locations had been damaged, so there was no place to have their public hearings. So parishes sought an AG opinion on what do we do, and they opined that they could reschedule. But now legislation has been put in place, and it has become part of revised statute 47-1705B to allow subsequent hearings and subsequent meetings. So you would no longer follow the opinion of 08-257, you would follow the statute, revised statute 1705B. So you need to mark in your book that AG opinion 08257. Beside that, you need to put now part of revised statute 47-1705B. And then the last opinion is 10-0030. It just provides that the provisions contained in revised statute 1705B do pertain to Orleans Parish. There was some confusion there. I mean, Orleans Parish is excluded from a lot of things. So rightfully so, they sought that opinion just for clarity, to be sure that they had to follow the roll forward procedures, and they do. So they have to follow all the same steps as any other taxing district would have to follow. Okay. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box. At this time, Patrick Virgadamo, who's one of our senior attorneys here with the Legislative Auditor, is going to come and present the open meetings law. Patrick, in his role here at the Auditor's office, he has done countless hours of research, not only on the open meetings law, but on public bid, on local officials, on, I just can't tell you what all he's done, on public entities, just in general. Every day things arise for Patrick he is just, I can't tell you how valuable he is to me. He has extensive knowledge on I can't go, words just can't explain how much I value Patrick. So here he is, and again, if y'all have any questions for him, put them in the Q&A box, and he'll be happy to answer those. So here's Patrick.
Thank you, Joanne. It's kind of hard to follow that, but this morning it's my pleasure to get to discuss with you guys the open meetings law. What we'll cover this morning is only a small part of what we normally would cover in a longer presentation on the open meetings law. So if you have questions after we're done with this, we'll try to answer some, but I would also suggest we have available resources on our legal assistance page of the Legislative Auditor's website, where we have an FAQ document on the open meetings law. We have some short videos, and we have questions that have previously been submitted to us by either local governments or CPAs, where we'll scrub the names of the innocent and the guilty alike, and put those questions up there. And of course, as Joanne said earlier and Jenifer said earlier, if you ever have questions on the open meetings law or other questions that we can help you with, we're always available for those questions, whether you call us or on our website, where you can submit those and it'll get emailed to our legal group so that we can try to respond back to you. We always try to pride ourselves on getting back to you the next day or within 2 days at the latest. Jenifer's always joked, if 48 hours passes and you don't hear from us, you may want to send someone to come check on us. But with that, we'll kind of get into the open meetings law and kind of do a brief synopsis of these important statutes and how they apply to you in the millage process. I won't go in the depths of the millage process because Joanne's going to cover that specifically later, but we'll go over how these statutes, what the requirements are, and then how they may impact you. So we'll follow along, and if you want to follow along in the setting millage rate book, these are going to be essentially pages 9 through 14, and I'll try to prompt you as we're going through this where you may want to turn the page to the next page of that book. So we'll begin with Article 12, Section 3 of the Louisiana Constitution. This essentially creates the right of the public to observe the deliberations of public bodies, which is the foundation of the open meetings law, and to examine public documents, or public records law, except where cases established by law. So where the legislature exempts certain things like executive sessions and things of those sort, though, unless there's an exception for it, the public generally has a right to observe these. Collectively, the open meetings and public records law are usually considered the sunshine laws. And the idea comes from a quote from former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. In one of his cases, he noted that sunshine is said to be the best disinfectant. The idea that when public functions and work is done in the light of day, it's usually not as corrupt and it's usually more transparent. And so that's why most states have passed open meetings law to provide for that transparency and to make sure that if the public is watching, you're less likely to get your hands caught in the cookie jar. So the first statute of the open meetings law that we'll talk about is 42:12. Essentially, this provision says that the open meetings law shall be construed liberally in favor of allowing public observation of public business. What this essentially means is if it's a 50-50 question of whether or not it should be open to the public or not open to the public, the courts have been directed to take the side of the public. So what this also means is if you have an exception where it says you can close a meeting to the public, those are going to be strictly construed. So if you don't meet all of the requirements of that exception, you're not going to be able to use that exception, because liberal construction favors the public having access. And so it's important that if you're using that exception, you document with your legal counsel and are following it to the T. 4213 is where we kind of find our definitions, kind of how Joanne went over some of the definitions for the millage process. The open meetings law gives us some definitions. And the first biggest one is public body. The biggest thing to understand with public body is it concludes your municipal governing authorities, like your board of aldermen, your city councils, your town councils, your parish governing authorities, whether it's the police jury or the parish council, school boards, levy boards, boards of commissioners for either levy boards or ports and things of those sorts, special districts, so your fire protection districts, your gravity drainage districts, any of those districts which usually have taxing authority, those are going to be subject to the open meetings. And then finally, committees or subcommittees of these entities, whether they're formal or informal, the AG has, and we'll talk about some scenarios where he has said these things are specifically going to be considered a public body. If you look at what questions get asked the most by the AG historically was, are we a public body? Now, one thing to know about a public body, the thing that's kind of consistent of all of these entities are that they're a board type of thing. They're the legislative side of these entities. So for a city, your city council, your board of aldermen, they are public bodies and they have their meetings in the open. The mayor and his executive departments, when they meet in their regular monthly or daily, weekly meetings, those are not a public body. They're the executive side. So they're not included within this. The same thing at the parish level. Those parish departments, they may have meetings with the caveat, however, especially when you have a police jury form of government, if there's some kind of committee that's been created by the police jury, and in some cases it may include a member of the police jury on it, that committee is going to fall under that committee or subcommittee provision and be a public body, because they are basically functioning as some kind to either take action or advise. With that, the other aspect is for a city, you sometimes have these citizen committees who are supposed to meet sometimes to consider nominations. Well, the AG has said because they are, even if they're informally created, their purpose is to meet and eventually make recommendations to the to the city board to take action for nominations. That he's said they should be considered public bodies because they're deliberating and essentially going to present eventually a recommendation to the actual public body itself. And so he's considered those to be committees or subcommittees. Now, meeting is the next definition, and this one's important because it's a gathering of the public body. So you have to have a quorum, and we'll talk about that next, of the public body meeting to either deliberate or take action on things that is under their control, their jurisdiction, basically things that they have control over, or where a quorum is meeting to receive information. This is the one that people sometimes forget. So if someone's coming to make a presentation to the board, that is still going to be considered an open meeting because they're receiving information about things that are over their jurisdiction and control. That said, the one kind of the catch that we get sometimes from this is, what about scenarios where we go attend, say, trainings? In the past, say this training when it was in person, if a quorum went to that, because it's not specific to your jurisdiction, it's a general knowledge scenario. The AG has said that doesn't fall within the open meetings provision. So you can basically go attend a conference where it's general knowledge. Now, if you're having an in-service type thing where someone's going to come in and train board members about things they have control over, that's going to fall under that definition, that second part of receiving information. So if you have a quorum present, it's going to be in open meetings. The other thing that the law makes clear is chance gatherings at social events. So if you happen to just be at the local festival, which hopefully in most places are going to start being able to have those again, and you have a quorum of the body there, just because they happen to be there doesn't make it an open meeting. What could be a problem is if they start talking about business. which most people say, don't be that person. Enjoy the festival, enjoy the fact that we're having them again, but you can't basically talk shop as either a quorum or what we call a walking quorum. Walking quorum is where you don't necessarily have a full group together at one time, but constructively, the classic example would be board member A goes talk to board member B. Board member B says, hey, look, I'm thinking about presenting this. Board member B, are you okay with this? Board member B says, yeah, I'm good with this. So then board member A goes to board member C, says, hey, I talked to board member B, he's good with this, here's what we're going, are you good with it? And then they go down the line, so that at the end of the day, constructively, a quorum of the body has actually discussed and deliberated whatever that issue may be without the public being able to see it in an open meeting. And so that walking quorum, the AG has consistently cautioned against. So you shouldn't be using things to straw poll, to kind of poll people before you do it. The other scenario of that is board member A goes to B and then C, and they say, we're not in favor of it. So board member A never puts it on the agenda. The public never gets the ability to even to hear the discussion on that topic. And so that's the other aspect the AG has cautioned against, is that you need to make sure if you're going to deliberate over something, those deliberations happen for the public to see it. So quorum, this one is kind of often misconstrued. It's a simple majority of that body, of the total membership of the body. So for example, if you have, say, a 5-member board for a town, 3 members constitutes a quorum. It's often sometimes incorrectly called 50% plus 1, but that's not strictly the case, because if you really look at a 5 and did half, it's 2.5 plus 1 would be 3.5, which bumps you to 4. That's not a quorum. 3 is the quorum for that. So you want basically a simple majority. The law, however, says in some circumstances, the law may define a quorum as something different. For example, you may have these large regional commissions where maybe 2 parishes or multiple cities are involved. Because there's so many members sometimes in these large commissions of like 15 plus people, it's kind of unrealistic that you're going to get a majority of those in one place at any one time because of schedules. And so in some cases, the law may allow for something that's lower, like 40% or 30% is considered quorum, so they can take action. It's more prevalent in those commissions where they're more advisory. They're just receiving information so they can take it back to the constituents of those different members. But it's one of those, you have to look. The default is simple majority, but you may need to look at your specific law to see if there's something defined differently for quorum. Now, the biggest thing under 4214, it's kind of the commandment of open meetings. Meetings must be open. So you must have open meetings unless the law gives you an exception. This kind of goes back to what the Constitution says, is that you have a right to observe deliberations unless in cases provided by law, which would be executive sessions or where the law allows for you to close your meeting to the public. Now, if you'll turn your page, we'll talk about the other part of 4214, which is voting. And this is important, and we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about the virtual meeting provisions of the law. Generally speaking, under the open meetings law, members must be present physically in order to be counted as quorum and to vote. If they're not physically there, we get this question, especially now with the virtual stuff, if they're not there and the exceptions doesn't apply, can they still listen remotely? Yes. Just like any member of the public, you can provide for members of the public to remotely watch your meetings and provide comments. And so that person who's not there, even though they're a board member, could be just like any other member of the public and watch. What they can't do is be counted in order to meet quorum, and they can't vote on things because they're not physically there. What the law kind of uses is the Latin viva voce, basically vote of the voice. And what the AG has said is you have to be either cast orally your votes, or if you have some kind of electronic voting machine. If anyone's ever seen the legislature, they have a big fancy one up on the wall. So when there's a vote, you know what the totals are and who voted, whether they voted yes, no, or they were just not there. And so you need to have either oral votes or those electronic voting that shows who voted and how they voted to meet that requirement of 4214. Again, you can't use secret ballots, straw polling, or other means to circumvent a public vote. And the AG specifically in AG Opinion 14-0140 has said his caution public members, you should not be texting each other during a meeting unless the public you're going to put that up on the board for everybody to see. Kind of like the teacher used to say, do you have enough for everyone? Or you're going to share with everyone what you're talking about? The idea is that if it's related to the things that you're supposed to do in open meeting, you can't do by text to circumvent that during a meeting. Now, public participation and commenting, this is one where people get it wrong a lot and it causes an issue for them. Essentially what the law says is public bodies, except for school boards, must afford an opportunity for public commenting before action is taken on any of the agenda items. So this can be a single period at the beginning of the meeting, or you can allow for a public commenting period before each item. And the reason why we get the question sometimes, can I just do it at the end of the meeting? No, that would be a violation of the open meetings law, because you have to give people an opportunity to comment before you take the action. That said, and we see this a lot with police juries and parishes especially, and sometimes with the municipalities, you may have a separate public commenting period that is specifically for things maybe that aren't on the agenda. So you may have it as like, instead of calling it public comment, it's like public concerns, public address, where they have ability to kind of address the council on other matters. That's fine to be done. That can be done any point in the meeting, and a lot of places will do it towards the end of their meeting. But as far as for public commenting under the open meetings law, you need to, at the beginning of the meeting or before each item, allow for the public to comment. And some places may do it at the beginning, and then for big agenda items, do a hybrid of both. That said, and the reason why I said school boards being the exception, school boards have their own provision in the open meetings law, and they are specifically required to allow public commenting before each agenda item. So they cannot have a general public commenting period at the beginning of their meeting and then just go through their meeting. They have to allow and ask for public commenting on each agenda item. And so that's one, if you're a school board, you want to make sure your board is doing that, or any of their committees or subcommittees. Now, 4217.1. We've gotten a lot of questions ever since it became into play during the COVID pandemic. It basically said, even though the law normally says you have to be physically present, we're going to do an exception where the governor has made a declaration of a disaster, and because of that declared disaster, it would impact the health, safety, and health, welfare, and public safety of the public and the board, public body, to meet physically in one place under the normal rules. And so with the COVID disaster, entities were able to use this exception to do meetings through Zoom or other things, so that that board member didn't have to be physically present. The biggest thing you should star next to this is the emergency declaration, as Joanne pointed out earlier, has basically terminated. It was not renewed and terminated effective March 16th of 2022. What that means is, absent a new declaration by the governor of a disaster that trigger those provisions, so that the health, safety, and welfare is endangered by meeting physically in a place, the exception doesn't apply right now. Local exceptions, local declarations are not sufficient. The law says the governor has to declare that exception, that disaster, in order to trigger this. I would say keep an eye on the legislative session, because there may be some tweaks to this type of law in both for the open meetings law and in general, because I think Zoom is becoming more of a commonplace thing for people. Even with the COVID emergency declaration ending, we have hurricanes and things of those sorts. So there may be scenarios where the law could be used, or it could get amended either this session or in future sessions. So we'll keep you up to date on that. And for sure, if you keep an eye on our open meetings FAQ, if there are changes during the session on the open meetings law, we would handle that as part of our update. We usually try to have those out by the 1st of August, which is when the new laws generally take effect. So With 17.1, let's assume that there was still an emergency declaration in place. What that exception does is it allows you to meet virtually, either telephone or video, when those disasters or emergencies declared by the governor are such that it would cause a problem for safety, health, welfare, and public and health for the individuals. So assuming that the governor has declared a state of emergency, it's going to be depending on what the geographic area of that declaration is. For example, with the tornadoes that happened a couple weeks ago, he issued an emergency order for that. Within that short amount of time afterwards, it may have been plausible where the entities in those, in like Arabi or in those communities, may have been able to use this provision, because if, let's say, town hall got destroyed and they didn't have a place to meet, but there were things that needed to be taken care of, they may have been able to use this. Hurricanes, that I always caution you, because as more time passes, it's unlikely that you shouldn't be able to meet somewhere. And so the COVID disaster was kind of unique, and that's really what the law was originally created for, was the idea is that it was an ongoing thing where you just couldn't meet because of the limits on how many people could be in one place and things of that sort. Now, the nature, this is the second component that you have to meet, is there's a declaration issued. That nature of that emergency disaster has to be such that it would cause a meeting under normal rules to be detrimental to health, safety, or public welfare. The key there is it can't just be just a disaster. It has to be a disaster of such that it would cause that. The presiding officer of the public body also has to do a specific certification of notice of those meetings, and the agenda is limited. It's not just go forth normally. Generally speaking, it has to be matters that are related to the response to the disaster or emergency, things that if you don't take care of it would stop services to the public or cause severe economic dislocation or hardship. Basically, things you have to vote on. One of those things could potentially have been doing your millage assessment, because everything stops if you don't properly assess. You won't be able to collect. The other aspect of this is the matter is something that's critical to continuation of the body. And it's such that because of some federal or state guideline that hasn't been suspended, requires you to do something by a certain date, you have to be able, you can take those up. And then the last agenda item that was kind of added later during the special session was that if it's another matter that's critical or time sensitive, even though the law doesn't necessarily mandate a specific date for it, but it's something the presiding officer says, we really can't delay doing this, you can add it to your agenda, but you can't take it up unless 2/3 of the members present say, we agree, we need to go ahead and take this up. We can't wait till a later meeting. Now, one thing that we've gotten questions when this was in effect was, what happens if you have a quorum physically present? Can the remaining members attend virtually? And what we basically cautioned was, we don't think you could do that, because the law says the emergency has to be such that you can't meet under normal rules. If a quorum is able to be physically present, you can meet under normal rules because you have a quorum physically present and can carry on. And so what we cautioned people was, you want to make sure that you don't have a physical quorum present if you're using this exception in the one location. You want to make sure people attend virtually so that you can continue to operate virtually. So if, for some instance, a new COVID emergency was declared, you would then need to make sure you followed it that way. Some special rules for meetings, virtual meetings, when it applies. The public body, no later than 24 hours before the meeting, excluding weekends and holidays, has to provide notice and agenda and detailed information on how the public can participate and submit comments regarding agenda items. So you need to basically make sure they have some mechanism. So if you're using Zoom, they can use the chat or the comment feature to submit comments. Some places used email addresses, so you could submit those in before and during the meeting. And if you've ever watched the legislative committees when they were using it, what they would do is just read those comments into the record so that they were part of their minutes of their meeting, just like someone else who had publicly commented. These notices have to be posted on the public body's website and provided to the media who request notice, which is similar to what we'll talk about for under normal rules. And it has to be distributed widely to known news media outlets that either broadcast or publish within the geographic area. So your radio, TV stations, and newspapers, even if that's not your official journal, if you have a print media or radio and television media, you have to notify them. What we kind of suggested during the heart of the COVID pandemic to meet this requirement was, just like for the second issue of when the media requests knowledge of your meetings, create an email listserv, and whenever you do your meetings, just send it out. And so for this, you would just basically create who are our broadcast and print media in the area, create a listserv for it, and just push out your email to them whenever you go to schedule a meeting under the exception. Now, it's important to understand you have to provide a mechanism to receive public comment both prior to and during, and you have to make sure that you properly identifying knowledge all public comments during the meeting, and maintain those part of your minutes of your meeting so that it's as though that person was physically there. The presiding officer also has to ensure that each person participating in the meeting is properly identified. So like in Zoom, you want to make sure people have names, and that the public, usually there's rules that says you have to put a name so we know who you are when you go to comment. And you have to ensure that all parts of the meeting, excluding matters in executive session, are clear and audible to all participants. So if something happens and someone cuts off or the video cuts off, you can't just keep going on. You have to stop and make sure that the public can get back into the meeting before you proceed. Now, 4219, which a lot of that's going to be on the next page of your thing, is the general rules that provide for notice and agenda for meetings, for the normal rules. In those cases, if you have regularly scheduled meetings that are established either by statute or ordinance or a charter, for instance, most municipalities are required under the Larson Act to have at least one meeting a month. Some by ordinance may do 2 meetings a month. If you have regularly reoccurring meetings because of law, either whether it's ordinance or statute or charter, at the beginning of the calendar year, you are required to do a notice of all of those meetings to the public and publish those. And the idea is being, you're figuring out, does a holiday fall on one of those days? Or are we moving it because of a festival or something else? At the beginning of the year, the public will then be able to see, okay, we meet every 3rd Wednesday of the month. Here's what those days are going to be, so I can calendar them. Beyond that, and for any other entities who maybe don't have regular scheduled meetings, the separate requirement is before each individual meeting. And that's separate from if you have regular scheduling. You have to do both if you have regular scheduling, both at the beginning of the year and then before each individual meeting. Before each meeting, you have to basically provide a notice and agenda, both by posting it either at the physical site where you're going to meet or your principal office, or by publishing it in your official journal. Most people that I've seen usually do the physical posting because it gives you more leeway of making of changes up to that 24-hour before. So that what that notice has to include is the things you normally would think of if you're going to have a meeting. What's the date, the time, the location, and you have to have the agenda posted. That agenda should be descriptive. It should basically, so if you were reading this and you didn't know about it, you'd have an idea of what's going to take place at that meeting. And Joanne will talk a little bit more about what she's looking for those action verbs, so that it's not just you're going to discuss, it's that you're going to take action, so that the people know you're not just going to talk about something, you're actually planning on doing something. You need to make sure agenda items are listed separately, and you cannot make changes within 24 hours, exclusive of holidays and weekends, prior to the meeting. So that means, let's say your meeting is on Mondays and Labor Day was going to be one of your meetings. You can't count any of Labor Day, any of Sunday, any of Saturday towards your 24 hours. So you're going to have to get that posted well in advance, usually on the Thursday, so that you can get all of Friday before that meeting posted. It means basically by midnight of Thursday, of Friday morning, you need to have it posted, so that that meeting on Labor Day would have at least 24 hours notice. Those changes, and this is why a lot of places post it physically. Before that 24 hours kicks in, you can make those changes. You can go change what's posted up there and update it as needed. However, once it's posted, and if you have a website, you also have to post it on your website as well. And the key is there, if you have a website. We've had questions, what about a Facebook page? We don't, and to my knowledge, the AG has never considered that a website. You also may have situations where special districts, the parish publishes stuff for you, but you don't individually have a website you have control over, which means you don't have a website. Now, it's still a good idea if the parish is going to normally post stuff for you to get it posted, but it's different than you having a website where you can control the posting of information. Now, the question comes up, what happens if the 24-hour period starts and you come up with something that needs to be taken care of? What do you do? Well, what the law says is the public body, by unanimous vote of who is actually present at the meeting, can vote to take and add something to the agenda. And so it's a way for you, if something's missed or at the last minute, to still take it up. The AG is generally cautions you shouldn't do this as a routine thing, because then it looks like you're avoiding letting the public know you're going to talk about something until you get into the meeting. But in a case-by-case basis, it is something that can be used to allow you to take up something. We had a question before where someone says, what about if we had a typo in our agenda and we didn't have time to correct it? Well, the easiest way to fix that is vote unanimously to add the corrected agenda item to your agenda, and you should be good. And so you want to make sure that you take, and it's in the minutes reflected, that a motion was made to add something to the agenda and that a unanimous vote of those present voted to add it. Now, 4219.1, this is an additional notice in addition to the normal notice requirements for entities, political subdivisions, when you're going to ask to propose a new ad valorem or sales and use tax, or increase or renew an existing ad valorem or sales and use tax, and for the purpose of putting it on the ballot. So it's that point where you've decided you want to increase or propose one, and you want to take action to say, we want to authorize putting this on the ballot for the public to vote on. At that, before that meeting can occur, this notice has to be given, which is in addition to the meeting for the actual notice of the meeting. So essentially, and on the next page of your thing, you'll see where it talks about that notice has to have the date, time, and location of the meeting, just like you would normally have. But this one has to be specifically published in your official journal, no less than 20 days before the meeting and no more than 60 days before the meeting, so that public has extra notice that you're going to talk about taxes. The notice of the meeting also has to be announced in an open meeting. So whatever, if your meeting is going to be, say, the next month, 30 days away, you need to make sure at that meeting from the month prior, you're announcing, hey, we're going to take up this agenda item at next month's meeting. That additional notice also has to be provided through hand delivery or email to voting members of a governing authority. So if you're a special district where your police jury or your parish council has to approve any of your tax things before they go to the public, they have to be also provided this notice, either email or hand delivery, 20 to 60 days before, so that they're aware that this meeting is going to occur. And then you also have to provide it to your state senator and state representative whose district is either wholly or partly within your jurisdiction. The idea here, I think, is because they're going to get questions, and so they're aware that these tax propositions are going to be discussed. Now, 4220 is kind of the minutes, what you have to take to keep a record of your meetings. Written minutes must be kept, and they are a public record. There must be available to the public a reasonable time after the meeting, unless the law gives you an exception. So that could be things if you take separate minutes for your executive sessions or things of those sort. But generally speaking, what the AG has essentially said is you can't just wait till your next meeting and go into that meeting and say, we approve these meetings minutes, now they're the official minutes, and now you can have them. The AG says you can't do that. It's within a reasonable time, and there's a good reason for that. If you're a special district and you only meet quarterly, that means the public would have to wait 3 to 4 months before they could get minutes of your meeting. And the AG says, just no, you can't do that. If you're going to make changes at that next meeting, corrections to your minutes, those are going to be reflected in the minutes of that next meeting. And so you can't just say wait until they're the official minutes. And if you have questions of those, definitely reach out to us and we'll kind of get you those AG opinions and give you some guidance on that. Now, one thing we get a lot of questions on minutes is, do they have to be a verbatim transcript? No. Essentially, they need to be sufficient descriptions so that the reader can know what matters were taken up, what the outcomes of votes were, and identify that the legal procedures were complied with, including who was there and who wasn't. So those minutes should include your date, time, and location of the meeting, so you know when and where and how, what location they met, what members were recorded as present or absent, any substantive matters decided. So for your agenda item, so-and-so made a motion to do this, someone seconded it, and the vote of X, Y, Z in favor, those against for that specific action, so that you can go back and see, if you didn't go to the meeting, what happened. And then, of course, you're going to put any other information that the public body requests to be included or reflected. So if a council member says, I'd like this to be in the minutes, those are the things that should be in it. Now, publication of minutes is not something that's specifically addressed in the open meetings. Open meetings does say, if you have, again, if you have a website, within a reasonable time, usually 10 days after you've published in your journal, which we'll talk about in a second, then you have to put those up on your website and keep at least the last 3 months on your website. So there is a website publication requirement for minutes under the open meetings law. But general publication, so in your journal, municipalities, parish governing authorities, so your police juries and parish councils, and school boards are required by law to publish their minutes in their official journal with under 43:143. And this provision basically, this area of law for their selection of their official journal says that subject to criminal penalties, if they don't submit those minutes to their official journal within 20 days of the meeting, there are penalties under 43:144. So there's a hard and fast statutory deadline of 20 days to get it to your journal. Other political subdivisions, such as your special districts, are required to publish your minutes. So there is a specific requirement for publishing your minutes in the official journal, but this is under 43:171. Now, this provision for selecting your official journal and publishing your minutes in that journal does not give a specific deadline. It's essentially, it should be within a reasonable time of the meeting. What we've essentially said is, if you get it within the 20 days that the city, parish, or school board is required to, it's going to be hard for someone to say it wasn't reasonable because they had the same amount of time to do it under law. And now, again, about the website, within 10 days from publication in the journal, you're required to publish it on your website if you have one, and keep those 3 months posted on your website. Now, if you'll turn your page, this will be our last statutes we'll talk about. Specifically, 4223 requires, basically it provides that you can record meetings. It authorizes the recording, except for closed portions, that they can be videotaped or tape recorded, filmed, or broadcast live. The key here is this is also an authorization for the public. So you can't tell the public they can't record the open parts of your meeting. Now, what you can do is establish standards. So you can basically say, hey, you with the big camera equipment, you can't stand in front of everybody else so they can't see what's going on. We're going to have this little area squared off. If you want to use camera equipment, here you go. Some places for like tape recorders for reporters, they may say, hey, come put your tape recorders up on the dais and before the meeting and you're good. So those, you can do standards for how people do it so people aren't standing up blocking, trying to Facebook Live out in the middle of the public, blocking the people behind them, but you have to allow it. Now, non-elected boards or commissions who have taxing authority, so we could have some of those in this presentation, they are required to video or audio record, film, or broadcast live all of their proceedings. So it's not just a permissive record, they're required to because they're a non-elected board who can tax. Historically, that was mostly your neighborhood improvement, crime prevention districts, but a provision in 33:9099.2 basically exempts those governing authorities of crime prevention and security districts and improvement districts from this requirement, because a lot of them are basically just the alter ego of the HOA. And they're not necessarily always sophisticated enough to be able to hire someone to come in and record and do things. Now, violation of the open meeting law, it's important to understand any action that's taken in violation of the open meetings law may be voidable. It may be voidable if legal action is commenced within 60 days of the action. The idea being, if more than 60 days passes, if it's a violation of the open meetings law, it's kind of like on the playground, the no harm, no foul type thing. We've moved on. And so it puts a 60-day period that has to be challenged in order to challenge those violations. Now, civil penalties can be up to $500 a violation for willful violation of open meetings law, and personal liability can be attached to that. So this is one where council members want to make sure they don't do those straw polling and things of that sort, because if they're convicted of a violation that they intentionally did, it can carry $500 per violation personal liability. So they want to be aware of that. So with that, we'll look and I guess move back to Joanne and see if we have questions before we move on. And at this point, if you have some questions you'd like us to answer, please put those in the Q&A so that we can address them for you.
Thank you, Patrick. That was very informative. Thank you very much. Even I learned some new things from there, so thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions we're going to answer real quick, and then we're going to take a 15-minute break. The first question is, what do you do if your assessed value increases so much that you collect more than you need for the current year and the next year's GO bond payments? We have two options there. Either you can calculate your budget needs and roll forward the amount, only the amount that you need. You don't have to roll forward all the way up to the maximum authorized millage. Or you can, and I have an example of this that we're going to go over later in the presentation. Some taxing districts will roll forward to the maximum in 1 year to capture that maximum millage rate to keep from losing it, and then roll back down the following year. Because you only have to roll forward, levy it, and collect it in 1 year within that reassessment cycle to keep from losing it. So there are a lot of taxing districts that do that. They will roll forward, levy it, and collect it in one tax year, and then roll back down to a rate that meets their budgetary needs to keep from losing that maximum rate. So that is an option there. The second question is, this is the first time we will be setting millage rates for the new consolidated gravity drainage district. Previous millages were done by each separate district. Are there any special documents to file? So just a little background on this. This is a gravity drainage district, a consolidated gravity drainage district that voted to combine several drainage districts into one main district. Are there any special documents to be filed? The only special documents that to be filed would be the documents to create the consolidated gravity drainage district in this parish, and I believe that's already been done. So you would just adopt the millage rates under the consolidated gravity drainage district number 1. If you don't mind, shoot me an email so we can make sure that I've received that creating documentation, but I'm pretty sure we have. But as far as millage adopting documents, you would just follow the open meetings law and go forward from there. Okay, let's see. The next question is pertaining to the open meetings law, so we'll let Patrick take a look at that.
So the question we have here is regarding the 60-day, 20-day written and announced notice of meetings for when you're going to take the tax actions. Does this include weekends or holidays, or do we deduct those days from the count? For those, the 20 to 60 days are calendar days. It doesn't matter weekends or holidays because it's such a broad range. There isn't a specific restriction on it. It's only the 24-hour period that you can't because it says specifically exclusive of weekends and holidays. So because there's no such restriction here, the 20 to 60 day notice is 20 to 60 calendar days. We also had a question which I answered through typing a response for him. But if you have questions, not just on open meetings, but other legal questions, as Jenifer said earlier, please give us a call. Our number is 225-339-3871 for the legal section. You can also submit questions on our legal assistance page. We have a question submission there, and those will get sent to our entire legal group so we can try to get back to you as quick as possible. But we're happy to, if we can help you in any way. One thing we always say is we don't give formal written opinions. That's really because we don't want to intrude on the AG's role, but we're happy to talk with you on the phone over your issues. And if we don't have an answer, maybe be able to direct you to who may have that answer for you. So there are definitely two ways you can always reach out to us, either through the website by submitting a question or give us the call at 225-339-3871.
That's great. Okay, so now we're going to stop and take a break, about 15-minute break. So if you'll be back about 10:45, we'll pick up on the not rolling forward section of the book. Okay, we're back. We're back. I hope that 15 minutes was enough time for everyone. So the next section we're going to go over is the notice requirements when not rolling forward. So this is when you're not rolling forward. So we're going to begin on page 15 of your Setting Millage Rates book. Okay. So just as a suggestion, now you can do this any way you want to, but if I was with a taxing district, this is how I would suggest that you begin the process every year. That you contact the assessor in your parish to see if reassessment is going to be done. Because communication with your assessor is key in any year. Just keeping that open line of communication with your assessor in any year. So contact the assessor, early in the year, not January, February, but March. You could contact the assessor to see if reassessment is going to be done. If it's not going to be done, you have the millage rates right now because they're not going to be adjusted. You have your millage rates. You can decide if you're going to roll forward or if you're not going to roll forward. If reassessment is going to be done, that's your answer. You have to wait until you get your adjusted, the rates that are going to be recalculated. So, once you talk to the assessor and you make that decision, are we going to roll forward or we're not? Then that will tell you what section of the book you would need to turn to. So if you're not going to roll forward, you would just go to this section right here. There are a few things you would need to, take into consideration, your budgetary needs as to what millage rate you would levy. If you need to levy the full adjusted rate, if you need to capture that maximum rate, if you just have a general obligation bond, if you've over levied a general obligation bond, or, if you have more revenue in your general fund and you need to lower that down. So you just need to take a look at your budgetary needs, at your funds, to make the decision on what millage rates you need to levy and make that decision if you're going to roll forward or if you're not. And again, if you're not going to roll forward, you would just go to this first section of the book when it comes to the adoption of your millage rates. And it's on page 15, notice requirements when not rolling forward. When you're not rolling forward, that means you're going to levy any rate up to that adjusted millage rate. You've already accomplished the roll forward within this reassessment cycle. The only millage rate you have is a general obligation bond because we've already determined that general obligation bonds are not subject to reassessment. So anytime that you are not rolling forward, that's when you would use this section of the book. And these are the notice requirements. The only laws that are applicable when you're not rolling forward are the open meetings laws, which Patrick talked about before the break. On page 15, that first section that says applicable laws, revised statute 4211 through 28, open meetings law, that just reiterates the things that Patrick talked about before the break. So we're not going to sit there and reread all of that. But one thing I do want to point out, that second bullet, if you are one of those with the book of February 2022, you need to make a note right there that is the exception of revised statute 4217.1. That is no longer applicable because it expired when the governor did not renew that proclamation. So that right there is not currently applicable. So you need to make a note that you cannot, right now, you cannot have virtual meetings because the governor allowed that proclamation to expire. So anywhere you see a reference to revised statute 4217.1, that is where we'll be making a note that proclamation has been allowed to expire and electronic virtual meetings are currently not allowed. Okay, and then going on down just a few bullets where it says public bodies shall allow a public comment period at any point in the meeting prior to action. We know that shall means must. So you must allow that public comment period before any action or vote on your millage adoption. So then we're going to get more specific into the actual notice requirements whenever you're not rolling forward. Again, under that bolded topic, notice requirements for public meeting, there's a note pertaining to revised statute 4217.1. Again, if you have that February book, you want to make a note right there that proclamation was allowed to expire. So virtual meetings are no longer allowed. Whenever you're not rolling forward, that first bullet, you must provide written public notice no less than 24 hours before your public meeting. Whenever you're not rolling forward, you're only required to have a public meeting. Your written public notice shall include your full meeting agenda, and that agenda shall not be changed less than 24 hours prior to that meeting. On page 16 of your book, remember that each item must be listed separately on your agenda. Your notice must also include the date, time, and location of your public meeting. Your notice, the notice of public meeting, may be posted or published. That's up to you as the taxing district to make that decision if you want to post it or publish it. Most taxing districts do post it at the office of the public body or where the meeting is going to be held. That's just the simplest thing that allows the taxing district to have more control of that notice requirement. Remember, if you decide to publish it, the official journal has a publication deadline. So you have to meet that publication deadline in order for it to publish, to actually be in the paper no less than 24 hours. And if you publish it, you have to furnish us a complete tear sheet, the whole page of that newspaper where it ran. So again, most taxing districts choose to just post it, and that allows them more control over that notice requirement. In addition to the posting or publishing, you are required to put that notice on your internet website if you have one. Additional requirements to take place during the actual public meeting: the presiding officer or designee, you're required to read aloud those descriptions of each item. Again, you're required to allow that public comment period, and the taxing district can adopt those reasonable rules and restrictions regarding that comment period. One note I want to make about those reasonable rules and restrictions: the legislative auditor does not know your rules and restrictions. That's up to you as the taxing district to come up with those and document those somewhere, so that you will have those for any person coming to your public meetings to actually comment on an item. You want to have those available and to be able to provide those to someone making a comment. Then under the general notice requirements on page 16, your agenda must be clear as to what's happening during that public meeting. And then the second bullet on page 16 under general notice requirements are action verbs. It's important that you use action verbs so that the public is fully aware as to what is happening to your millage rate. If you just use the term discuss or consider, that implies that we're just going to talk about it. We're just going to take comments on it. We're just going to get the people's ideas, their thoughts on that. You must follow up with action. We're going to adopt or levy or fix that millage rate. If your charter requires that you use that term discuss or consider, you need to come back with some type of action, discuss and adopt, or consider and levy. That's important so that the reader of your agenda knows exactly what is happening to that millage rate. Your millage adoption should always take place in a public meeting. You might want to highlight that. Your millage adoption should always take place in a public meeting. On page 17 of the Setting Millage Rates book, it talks about the documents that you're going to turn in whenever you're not rolling forward. So as far as notice requirements, all you have to do is post or publish your full meeting agenda no less than 24 hours before your public meeting. We suggest more than 24 hours to give the public plenty of time to read that agenda, but the open meetings law requires no less than 24 hours, excluding weekends and legal holidays. Okay. So the documents that you're going to fill out and turn into the assessor, who will then forward them to our office. You're going to complete the notice of public meeting, one resolution or ordinance, an affidavit, and a notary data sheet. Again, on page 17, the requirements for the resolution or ordinance. When you're not rolling forward, only one resolution or ordinance is required. If your taxing district or your charter requires you to use an ordinance, then we will accept an ordinance. By all means, that is up to you. Just be sure that the vote count is clear, that it includes a vote count, a complete vote count, and it is clear. Whenever you're not rolling forward, a simple majority vote of the members present is required. Remember, you have to have a quorum to even hold the meeting. So in a simple majority vote of the members present. Your resolution or ordinance must be signed by an authorized person. The legislative auditor, we don't know who are your authorized signers. That's up to you to know that and have those documented somewhere. Your resolution or ordinance must show the date of adoption, and that date must correspond with your notice. We have gotten those resolutions in the past that the date did not correspond. It was just a typographical error where they pulled the prior year's resolution and just forgot to change the date. So you want to be sure that you are checking these documents and having someone proofread them behind you so that the correct information is on the document. Your resolution or ordinance must reflect a complete vote count. Even if the absent and abstained are 0, you should record 0. We do not know how many members sit on your board, how many seats make up your board, so you must fill in something by each voting option, even if it's 0. And then your resolutions or ordinance must adopt specific millage rates. That's something we will not fill in for you. We have gotten them blank before, and we've had to send those back to be corrected. And then you can put all of your millage rates on one resolution or ordinance if the vote count is the same for each millage rate, or if the vote count is different, of course, you would have to do different separate resolutions or ordinances. The requirements for the affidavit. Now, you are required to use our affidavit. On our website, there are sample notices and sample resolutions, and there is the required affidavit available on the legislative auditor's website. The affidavit is a sworn statement that's required by the legislative auditor. It's just assuring us that the public meeting was held properly. The affiant is attesting that all of the notice requirements prescribed by the open meetings law was properly met and it was held correctly. The blanks on the affidavit, the blanks to be completed, are describing the public meeting in which the millage adoption took place. So the blanks on the affidavit should correspond with information on your notice of public meeting. So when you're filling out your affidavit, you should have your notice of public meeting with you so that you can get the information correct. The affiant is attesting that the required notices are attached. So if you are the affiant, you want to be sure that you're reading that affidavit and you know what has been done and what is correct. The name of the affiant must be set forth on the affidavit. And on page 18, the affiant signature is required, and the affiant must sign in the presence of a notary. In the past, every year or so, we get an affidavit that has been notarized but not signed by the affiant. So revised statute 35, Title 35, requires that the affiant sign in the presence of the notary. So you need to make sure, if you are the affiant, that the notary is not signing a blank affidavit. And then revised statute 3512 mandates that the notary type, stamp, or print his or her name as commissioned with the Secretary of State's office. I know that some of you get questions by your notary, why are we having to do this? Well, revised statute 3512 mandates it, so that's the answer, and you can tell them that the legislative auditor requires it. So you're going to go out to that statute and make them do that, and then you want to make sure that your notary is in good standing with the Secretary of State's office. So you're going to go to the Secretary of State's website, which is found on page 18 of your setting millage rates book. You're going to confirm that the notary did type, stamp, or print as commissioned. You're going to confirm the notary's ID number or bar roll number if it's an attorney. And the only status that we will accept is active. If they have been suspended or expired, or for whatever reason, we will not accept it. Only will accept active. And since you're checking your notary, you want to be sure and print that form and attach it to your millage documents. That way, once you've submitted it with your millage documents, once the documents arrive here, we will not have to check your notary again. We'll know that they were in good standing when they sign your affidavit, and we'll just go with the form that you submit to us. Now, these next few slides you won't have in your setting millage rates book, but these are just sample documents that are available on the Legislative Auditor's website. This is a notice that can be used whenever you're not rolling forward. Again, this is just a sample. So, if you have another document, you can use that as well. You're not required to use this document. Just be sure that it includes all of the information and that you provide evidence of when you actually posted it. But you can tell at the top that it provides date, time, and place of the public meeting, and under new business item number 1, adopt the millage rate. This is a sample of the resolution. Again, you're not required to use our resolution, but it does have a place for the vote count, yeas, nays, abstained, and absent. These documents are out there in Word form and in PDF, so you can go out there and choose whichever file would work best for you. Now, this is the not rolling forward affidavit. This is a required document. You are required to use this affidavit. Now, this affidavit still has the paragraph pertaining to 4217.1. The affidavits on our website have been updated to remove that paragraph. So you would need to go out and get the current affidavit. It was updated in March of this year. Now, this is an example of a taxing district that did not roll forward last year. They did this perfectly. This is Gravity Sub-Drainage District number 1 of Gravity Drainage District number 2. Miss Barbara Vining did this, and if you know Miss Barbara, congratulate her. I've talked to her a while back, and she is retiring, and she's always done a good job. So she's worked hard on this. So congratulate her, and if she's happy to be watching, happy retirement, Miss Barbara. But I chose her documents because if you'll look down under item number 7, where that blue arrow is, They do like to use that term discussion, but you can see that she follows back up with discussion and action to adopt resolution of the millage rate for the tax year 2021. So they do use discussion and action. So it's clear here as to what they were doing to their millage rates. And then here is their resolution. The number that is written out beside their millage rate, 1068024, you don't have to worry about that number. That's just, we call that the millage key number. It's assigned by the database here at the Legislative Auditor's Office. Every individual ad valorem tax is assigned a millage key number, and that happens to be the millage number for this individual tax. You can see her vote count. In her case, she used their names and then wrote the word none for every other option. We'll accept the names or numbers as long as we can tell what the vote count is. And here is the affidavit. Her affidavit, same information in the date, time, and place paragraph corresponds with the information that is on her notice. And they signed it, Ms. Barber signed it in presence of the notary, Mr. McCain. And here is his notary data sheet. And if you look under about midway through the page, you see the status, and he was active. So really, not rolling forward is the simplest millage adoption action you can take. It just requires that you post your agenda no less than 24 hours but prior to the public meeting, excluding weekends and legal holidays. Again, more than 24 hours probably is a better practice, but open meetings law only requires 24 hours. Next, on page 19, we're going to go over when you are rolling forward. So when you are rolling forward, there has been an increase in property value at reassessment. So remember that roll forward only occurs when there is an increase in property value. The millage rates are adjusted downward to bring in the same revenue as the prior year. And the taxing district makes the decision that they want to roll back up to the prior year's maximum, which is also known as the maximum authorized millage, to generate more revenue, which, keep in mind, is also increasing taxes. And that's perfectly fine. That's your decision. The state constitution allows you as the taxing district to do that. When you're rolling forward, a public hearing and a public meeting are required. You want to highlight that. That is very important. You cannot forget that. When rolling forward, a public hearing and a public meeting are required. Article 7, Section 23C of the Louisiana Constitution requires 2 separate publications no less than 30 days before the public hearing. No less than two separate publications no less than 30 days before the public hearing. That's very important that you remember that, public hearing. Those publications shall include the date, time, and place of the public hearing and the subject matter of the public hearing. The publications to be published on 2 separate days in the official journal and in a newspaper with a larger circulation if there is one. So this is very important as well. When you are rolling forward, you have to publish ads in the paper on 2 separate days in your official journal and in a newspaper with a larger circulation if there is one. So you as the taxing district has to check the circulation numbers of your official journal and in another newspaper with a larger circulation within your taxing district. So if you have another paper within your taxing district, you need to be checking those circulation numbers. So you're either going to submit 2 publications or 4 publications. Revised Statute 471705B, and this is, you want to highlight this first bullet on page 19 under 471705B. Public hearings will be held in accordance with the Open Meetings Law. Now remember, the Open Meetings Law requires that you post the full agenda of your public meeting. So now, according to 471705B, you're having to post the full agenda of your public hearing in addition to your public meeting agenda. Additional notice requirements for increasing millage rates without further voter approval apply to all parishes except Rapides. I'm not sure how Rapides got that exception. Their legislatures were at the Capitol and got exempt. Publication shall contain a statement that the tax recipient body intends to consider levying additional or increased millage rates without further voter approval. That is verbatim from the law. So that statement, tax recipient body intends to consider levying additional or increased millage rates without further voter approval, must be verbatim in your publications when you're advertising your public hearing. Publication shall be published on 2 separate days in the official journal and in another newspaper with a larger circulation. So the Constitution and the statutes require that you publish on 2 separate days in the official journal and in a paper with a larger circulation, if there is one. The second publication in the official journal and in the newspaper with a larger circulation must have no less than 30 days from the date of the second publication to the hearing date. So there must be no less than 30 days between your last publication and your hearing. We suggest that you start the date before your public hearing and count backwards to more than 30 days. We've seen publications go 60 days out. It doesn't have a cap, it just cannot be any less than 30 days. 28 days or 29 days is less than 30 days. So you have to be sure that you're counting these days for these publications. If you give yourself extra days, it'll give yourself time to go out and check your ads and rerun them if there is an error, because there are no exceptions allowed in the 471705B. There are no exceptions for the errors in the publications. Your publications must be placed in a prominent section of the newspaper. Placement cannot be in classified advertisement or the public notice section. So it's up to you to decide what's a prominent section of the newspaper. Some people put them in the engagements, some people put them in sports, some people put them in the front section. That's up to you. It just cannot be in classified advertisements or public notices. Your publications must be formatted in a box with a bolded outline and a size of not less than 2 inches by 4 inches and printed in a bold-faced type. Now, we have seen the ads bigger than 2 inches by 4 inches. We've seen them a lot bigger, but they cannot be less than 2 inches by 4 inches. Several years ago, there was a taxpayer call us and ask, did you measure this ad? Well, we're not going to pull out our ruler and measure every one of the ads unless it's just an obvious error. But in this case, the ad was 1/8 of an inch off. So that roll forward failed. So be sure that whenever your publications run in the paper, you're checking to be sure that all of the formatting requirements are met. Because again, there are no exceptions. While it's unfortunate, the newspapers have been known to make errors, and even that would cause your roll forward to fail. Now, when we say that your roll forward will fail, does not mean that you're not getting any money at all, any revenue. It means you're not getting the increased revenue. You still would get the revenue from the adjusted maximum millage, which would be the same revenue as the prior year. And if you roll forward early enough in the year, you can always come back in that same year later and start the whole process over. One thing you need to make note of is that your location that you publish in the 2x4 ads has to be the same location that you give notice of later. So your location has to be consistent throughout the entire process. So keep that in mind whenever you're planning these roll forwards, that if something comes up later, you cannot move your public hearing. It has to be held where you advertise it. Okay. You turn the page to page 20. Publication charges by the official journal shall not be in excess of the regular charges for regular advertising. The legislative auditor does not know what are the charges for regular commercial advertising. That's up to you as the taxing district to work that out with the newspapers. Failure to timely publish renders the millage null, void, and of no effect. So again, if you don't meet these requirements, that will cause your roll forward to fail, but again, it would just revert back to the adjusted millage rate. On page 20 of your setting millage rates book, there is a sample publication. That's just a sample of something that a notice that the legislative auditor that my office we drew up here. I laughed last week when we did the workshop that this was drawn up in 2011. I think it's time for me to update our sample publication, but it's still correct today. That would provide you the information that you need. Most taxing districts use that sample publication. It's just a sample, so you could develop your own. Just be sure that it includes all of the required information. Proofs of, and one note you want to take note of and highlight on page 20 of your setting millage rates book, proofs or affidavits of publications will no longer be accepted whenever you are doing these publications, unless they include the specific formatting and placement of each 2x4 ad. We've gotten away from that, and we're getting a lot of errors with the 2x4 ads for some reason the last year or so. And so we've got to know that all the requirements are being met. So proofs or affidavits of publications will no longer be accepted unless they include the specific formatting and placement of these 2x4 ads. You are required to submit the full tear sheet, which is the full page where the ad ran. On page 20, as a tax recipient body, you are required to provide the assessor in your parish the date, time, and place of your pending public hearing. The assessor is required to maintain a list of all those public hearings and may put that on their website. In addition to the 2x4 ads, as the taxing district, you are required to issue a press release to newspapers. And in the law, newspapers is plural, so you should issue it to more than one, and to area broadcast media. Now, there's no really guidance on these press releases. A lot of taxing districts tell me they just send them the same information that's in the 2x4 ads. There's no timeline for the press releases. I hear that taxing districts send that, 2 or 3 weeks prior to the public hearing. As a suggestion, I do advise that you get some type of confirmation that you have done what you're required by law to do in regard to these press releases, because we have no authority over the actual broadcast media. So you want to get some type of confirmation that you issued the press release, and whether it's actually read out, we don't know. but as the taxing authority, you have done what you're required to do by issuing the press release. And then you are required to post the notice of public hearing and a recitation of the current budget on your website if you have one. So in addition to the press release and the 2x4 ads, you're also required to post the notice of public hearing on your website and a recitation of your current year budget. By that recitation of the current budget, again, it really doesn't provide us any guidance on what they expect. Some taxing districts put their full budget, a link to their full budget. Others put a line item out there. Others put whatever they publish in the newspaper. But you need to make sure that you have some type of information out there on your current year budget. Then going on down to the last bullet on page 20. In your 2x4 ads, you're also required to include an estimate of the amount of tax revenues to be collected in the next tax year and the amount of increase attributable to the roll forward. So now it's telling us that this just came about and that you are required to include dollar amounts in your 2x4 ad. The first dollar amount would be the amount of overall taxes you expect to collect in the tax year that you roll forward. The second amount would be the amount attributable to the roll forward, the actual increase over what you would have received if you had not rolled forward. Again, there's that note on the bottom of the slide about the proofs of publication. And again, on the top of page 21, it goes on to explain about the amounts attributable to the increase. Revised Statute 47-1705.1 requires any taxing authority with a non-elected board and in a parish with a population between 230,000 and 250,000 to coordinate the date, times, and place of all public hearings in which they seek a millage increase with a parish governing authority. Again, right now we don't know what parishes this will apply to. So if you think that your parish falls between that population parameter, I suggest that you contact your assessor, your parish governing authority, and keep an eye on the legislature. And then we get to subsequent meeting and subsequent hearing. If you recall, we mentioned this in the AG opinion section. So again, no longer should you follow the AG opinion. You should follow Revised Statute 47-1705B. It's on page 21 of your Setting Millage Rates book. If the public hearing to consider levying additional or increased millage rates is canceled or postponed, or if the proposal was considered at the public hearing without action or vote. So that's very important, without action or vote. You want to highlight that. Without action or vote. Then any future hearing to consider such proposal, you want to highlight that, such proposal, shall be advertised and publicized as required by Revised Statute 47-1705B, except that no newspaper advertisement shall be required. So if something comes up and you have to cancel or postpone your roll forward, you can do so under the subsequent meeting, subsequent hearing provisions without having to rerun your 2x4 ads. However, you cannot allow any action or vote whatsoever. The district court and the appeals court have ruled that the entire roll forward process is one proposal. So the whole thing is one matter. So you have to table the whole roll forward process. You cannot allow any action or vote. You have to table it into a subsequent hearing and subsequent meeting. And once you do that, you do not have to do the 2x4 ads again, but you do have to provide the assessor the new pending hearing date The assessor has to add that date to their list, and you as the taxing district do have to issue new press releases and to the area newspapers and to the area broadcast media. You do not have to do the 2x4 ads again. Okay. So up until this point, we've been talking about the public hearing. That's very important. We've been talking about the public hearing, and all of that has occurred, with exception of the press releases, no less than 30 days before the public hearing. Now we're getting closer to the actual date of your public hearing and your public meeting. So now you have to follow the open meetings law. So on page 21, the bottom of page 21, you'll see that note, that provision, revised statute 4217.1. So those of you that have the book from February, you need to make a note that that provision, that proclamation was allowed to expire. And then you look on page 22, go to notice requirements for the public hearing. All of this has been talked about. Before that, all that was talked about with Patrick. So we're not going to go over that again. All that stuff that we've gone over 2 or 3 times. So we're not going to go over that anymore. But your notice requirements for your public hearing. They require written notice no less than 24 hours, excluding weekends and legal holidays, before the public hearing. Your full hearing agenda, date of the public hearing, time of the public hearing, and location of the public hearing. You can either post or publish your notice of public hearing. It includes written notice of your public meeting, excluding weekends and legal holidays. It requires full meeting agenda, the date, time, and place of your agenda, and again, you can either post or publish your notice of public meeting. Both of these should go on your taxing district's website. Now, typically, your public hearing and your public meeting are on the same date. Your public hearing will take place immediately before your public hearing will take place immediately before your public meeting, is how we typically see it. On page 23, additional requirements during the actual meeting. All of these we've gone over before as well. The presiding officer or designee must read aloud the description of each item before action is taken. The taxing district must allow a public comment period at any point in the meeting prior to action. So you're going to have your public hearing, which will be for public comment. And then in the actual public meeting, you're going to have public comment again before the actual vote. And then on page 23, under general notice requirements, again, your agenda must be clear. In your public meeting, action verbs must be used. And again, the second bullet from the bottom, your millage adoption must take place in your public meeting. There should be no vote in your public hearing. Your vote must take place in your public meeting. On page 24, at the top, just keep in mind that if you choose to publish your agendas, we require the full tear sheet. I had the question before, what is a tear sheet? A tear sheet is we want that full page out of the paper. You're going to tear it out of the paper and send that full sheet to us with your millage documents. We have noted in the book that if you have letterhead, we ask that you use the letterhead documents whenever you're doing your millages. It's not required. Don't go out and purchase letterhead, but it does provide additional information. the documents you're going to turn in whenever you're rolling forward. You're going to submit the notice of public hearing, which includes the full hearing agenda. You're going to submit the notice of public meeting, which is your full meeting agenda, original tear sheets of the publication from the official journal and from the newspaper with the larger circulation if there is one. And there's that note again about the proofs or affidavits of publication. You're going to submit 2 resolutions or ordinances, an affidavit, and a notary data sheet. All the other notices or documents you're going to keep in your file. I suggest that you keep copies of everything that you send to the assessor, just in case there's some questions that come up in the meantime before you get your approved documents back. The requirements for the resolutions or ordinances, you're going to have 2 separate resolutions or ordinance. The first resolution or ordinance requires a simple majority of the members present. It must set forth the adjusted millage rate determined at reassessment. So your first resolution is going to adopt that lower rate. That resolution will adopt the lower rate to bring in the same revenue as the prior year. The second resolution, and this is important, requires 2/3 vote of the total membership. And total membership includes vacant seats. The second resolution or ordinance requires 2/3 vote of the total membership. It must set forth and designate the adjusted millage rate as shown on resolution number 1 and the increased rate being levied for the current year. So that would be your maximum rate if you're going all the way up, or the rate that you want to go on the tax roll. And of course, both resolutions must reflect a complete vote count. Both resolutions must be signed by an authorized person, show the date of adoption, just like before. On page 26, they must again show a complete vote count. The requirements for the affidavit. Again, the affidavit is a required document that's found on the Legislative Auditor's website. It's a 2-page document. It's a sworn statement required by the Legislative Auditor. The blanks on the first page are describing the open meeting, the public meeting, and they should correspond with your public meeting. Toward the middle of the page, on the first page, there's a statement that says roll forward occurred, yes or no. If your board passes that increase by 2/3 vote, you're going to mark yes. If they do not pass your roll forward, you're going to mark no. This will let me know whether to go ahead and check those 2x4 ads or not. If you mark no, I'm just going to skip over your 2x4 ads and levy the rate that's on your adjusted, levy your adjusted rate, the lower rate. If they mark yes, I'll go ahead and check your 2x4 ads to make sure they've met all the formatting requirements. The affiant is attesting that all the requirements to roll forward were done. So again, if you are the affiant, and especially if you're rolling forward, you want to make sure that all of those roll forward requirements were done. The affiant is attesting that the notice requirements are attached. Your name must be set forth on the affidavit, and again, you're signing it in the presence of the notary, and the notary is going to affix their ID and their bar roll number if they're an attorney. Again, you want to go out to the notaries, check the notary status as active, so you can go to the Secretary of State's website and confirm all that information, and you want to print and attach that notary data sheet to your documents. Again, these next few slides are just sample forms that are available on our website. They're not in your book, but they are available on our website as Word documents or as a PDF. This first sample of notice of public hearing / meeting You can see item 1, a public hearing will be held as follows: date, time, and place. And there's a place for your public hearing. And then it says close public hearing. And then it says item 2, a public meeting will be held, date, time, and place of public meeting. And then it goes into the public meeting agenda. Typically, your public hearing is held 30 minutes ahead of your public meeting. That's typically how we see that. Under new business, there's a place to adopt the adjusted millage rate, which will be the lower rate. And item number 2, set forth the adjusted millage rate and roll forward to the millage rates not exceeding the maximum authorized millage. That is the roll forward. That notifies the reader that the taxing district is going to roll forward. The second notice of public hearing / meeting, it is the same exact notice, except under new business, there's a third item that says adopt other authorized millages or taxes. That's just maybe if you have a bond that's not subject to the roll forward, or in addition to the taxes you are rolling forward, you have a new tax that's not roll forward, is not applicable. Or maybe you have some taxes you decided to roll forward and others that you're not. So that just gives you that third item to put on the agenda. This is resolution number 1. If you look at that top paragraph, you'll see that word adjusted is bolded. That's a clue as to what goes on resolution number 1. That lower rate that will generate the same revenue as the prior year would go on resolution number 1. It requires a simple majority vote of the members present. Resolution number 2 is your roll forward resolution. So it will include the adjusted rate in the middle column, and that rate should correspond with the rate on resolution number 1. And in the third column, under the levied column, that is going to be the rate you want to go on the tax roll. And this is the resolution that requires no less than 2/3 vote of the total membership. This is the affidavit. Now, it is required that you use our affidavit. Again, you'll see that it still contains that paragraph for 4217.1, but the ones on the website have been corrected now. In the middle of the page, you see that roll forward occurred statement, yes or no. If your board passes your roll forward, you're going to mark yes. If they decide no, they don't want to increase the revenue, you will mark no. This is the second page of the affidavit. There's 14 items that the affiant should be checking to be sure that they were done correctly. Now, this is an example of a roll forward that was done last year. This was done by the Washington Parish School Board. This is their 2x4 ad, was published on April the 28th for a public hearing that was held on June 10th. They gave date, time, and place of their public hearing, and you can see in the ad they included those dollar amounts. This ad was published on May 5th, again for June 10th. Now, they had their official journal and a newspaper with a larger circulation, so they had to submit 4 ads. This one was also published on April the 28th. And this one was published on May 5th. And then it came time to actually post their agendas. This is at the beginning is their notice of public hearing will be held on June 10th at 6 p.m. And their agenda item just simply reads, a public hearing will be held to consider levying increased millage rates after reassessment and rolling forward. Then you can see where they closed the public hearing and they entered into the public meeting June 10th at 6:15 p.m. or immediately following the public hearing. And then on item number 9, they adopted the adjusted millage rates. Item 10, they set forth the adjusted millage rates and roll forward. And item 11, they did have other authorized millage rates to adopt. And then they just continued on with their agenda. We do want your full agenda, not just the millage rates. We want your full agenda. This is resolution number 1, where they levied the adjusted rates. And you can see here that she used the numbers under the vote count. And this is resolution number 2. And you can see where the taxes that they rolled forward under the adjusted rate column have the same adjusted rates as resolution number 1 did. And under the levied column are the rates they want to go on the tax roll. And here is their affidavit. At the roll forward occurred statement, they marked yes, so that we know that they did roll forward, so they chose to roll forward. And here's the second page of the affidavit and their notary data sheet. Now this next example, for the person before the break that was asking about what if we have such an increase in values that it would bring in more revenue than necessary. This is an example of the Terrebonne Parish Assessment District. They rolled forward in 2020 to secure their maximum millage rate. And then in 2021, they rolled back down. They rolled forward again in 2020 to secure the maximum millage rate and rolled back in 2021 to lower it. You only have to roll forward, levy it, and collect it in 1 year within that reassessment cycle to secure it for the next reassessment. And here's where they posted their agenda. They just had to follow the open meetings law. After they rolled forward in 2020, in 2021, they just had to follow the open meetings law. And this is just an example of a general obligation bond. These are screenshots from the millage database, but I just wanted to give you an example of how a millage obligation bond should fluctuate throughout the repayment term. They won't always go down. There will be times where they will have to increase. But this is Calcasieu Parish School Board. In 2016, they were levying 18 mills, but in 2017, they had to increase it to 18.4, and then it's been decreasing since then. But here's one for Rapide School District number 11. In 2016, they were levying 6.37, and then they had to increase it to 2019. They got up to 8.98 because of property values. But then since then, they've been slowly decreasing it. So general obligation bonds will fluctuate either upward or downward depending on property values. Excuse me. So this is just some access to information that you'll find. This is in your book. This is to our website here. It's some information that you'll find on our website. Most of the information for your millage adoption is found on the assessors and millages page of the website. It has FAQs about millage adoption, those pension reports that we talked about earlier, maximum millage reports, the sample forms that you will need if you decide to use our forms, and the required affidavits. This is a screenshot of the assessors and millages page. You probably saw that when you went to register for the workshop, but this is where you would get all of those reports and the forms that if you choose to use our sample forms and the required affidavit. And this is a copy of the Morehouse Parish Maximum Millage Report. Now this is not a required report that we have to do by statute. We just do this as a courtesy for the taxing districts, but it does provide some pretty significant information. But one thing I want to point out to you, if you look all the way to the right under the levied column, The 2021 slot year, that's the rate that went on the tax roll for 2021. The 2022 slot year, the maximum millage is what is the highest rate, and the adjusted maximum is the lowest. So if you look at that very first line, that taxing district can levy any rate up to 4.71 just by following the open meetings law, or they can roll forward to 4.75, the maximum millage. And these are out on our website right now if you wanted to go look at your parish and your tax. The parish taxes begin with a 1,000, and the municipal taxes begin with a 5,000. They're at the end of the reports. This is the pension reports for Caldwell Parish. These are also available on our website. And this is a screenshot of the legal assistance page. It just gives you some FAQs of what's available. Patrick mentioned these earlier, but the legal assistance, the legal page, has all kinds of information out there for you regarding the FAQs, regarding COVID, public contracts, public funds, public bid. You could go out there and there may be an answer to one of your questions already. And then this is on our legal page as well, that you can submit a question. Well, submit a question to our legal department. It's on that same legal page. If you look under the menu to the left, it says submit a question. You can type this in and it will go straight to our legal division, and they would reply back to you pretty quickly there. Pretty easy to submit a question to the legal department. And then this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out and use this email and call. This is my direct line. Call me anytime if you have any questions or anything. But that pretty much wraps up the book presentation. We do have some questions in, so we'll go over those real quick. And if you have any more, just keep sending them in. We have a few extra minutes, so we'll go over these real quick and see what we can do here. Okay, with regards to reading aloud the description, is that just the agenda item, or is that the entire resolution being read aloud? Well, as far as reading aloud the description item, the description, that's just the agenda item, but you are to read aloud the resolution and ordinance as well to get it on the record. So yes, that's kind of a two-way question. So as far as the agenda item, yes, you have to read that into the record as well, but you are required to read the resolution into the record as well. So if we are not rolling forward and are just doing a millage renewal, we need to have an open public meeting to adopt the tax renewal amount with votes first before it goes to an election. So if I understand this right, so you're required to adopt your millage rates annually, regardless if you're rolling forward or not. So a millage renewal, so if your tax has expired, you are required to go before the voters first and put it on the ballot and go before the voters. In regard to renewal, if you mean just your annual adoption, the voters would not vote on that. Of course, your board would vote on that. So I'm not sure what you mean by renewal. So if you mean your tax has expired, of course you would go to the voters first before you would even send anything to the legislative auditor. If you mean your annual adoption, there would be nothing to send to the voters. You would just go ahead with your millage documents like you typically would in a year. What is the difference between a public hearing and a public meeting? Well, generally a public hearing is to take public comment. There wouldn't be any action taken in a public hearing in regard to the millage adoption process. Now keep that in mind, we're talking about millage adoption here. So in regard to the millage adoption, your process, you're taking public comments, you're hearing comments from the public here. And then the action is going to take place in the public meeting. Patrick has come back in, so if he has any other comments, I'll let him mention that as well. When rolling forward, can the public hearing and the public meeting both be held on the same date? For example, can the hearing be set for 7:15? Yes, we can. That's typically how it's done. For example, can the public hearing be set for 7:15 p.m. and the meeting be set for 7:30 p.m.? Yes, that's a perfect example. Typically, that's how it is done. On the same date, public hearing right before the public meeting. If the meeting agenda time states 6 p.m. or immediately following the 5:15 public hearing, is it correct that the meeting cannot start earlier than 6 p.m., even if the public hearing does not take the full 15 minutes, or can the public meeting start before 6 p.m.? No, the public meeting cannot start before 6 p.m. That is correct. The 6 p.m. or immediately following the public hearing allows for if the public hearing were to go over that 15-minute time slot. But if the public hearing were to end early, no, the public meeting should not begin before 6 o'clock. Is there a grace period on getting the paperwork submitted to the legislative auditor? For several times in the past, we were after the deadline due to our assessor not getting our millage value letters to us until May. Is there a grace period? What is absolute latest that we can get the paperwork to the legislative auditor? That's a good question. The legislative auditor does not enforce a deadline. Yes, the law does provide a June 1st deadline, but like I said, there are AG opinions that allow the assessor to waive the June 1st deadline. So we pretty much leave it up to the assessor to set that deadline. They know what's going on with their parish, if there's any extenuating circumstances that would keep a taxing district from meeting that June 1st deadline. So we typically leave it up to them to come up with a reasonable deadline. We don't enforce the June 1st deadline. But again, keep in mind that there are other taxing districts in your parish that are waiting. We don't send things to the tax commission until everything within one parish is received. So you want to work with the assessor and get those millage documents to their office as soon as possible. So Patrick is here now, and I'm going to ask him to elaborate on what is the difference between the public hearing and public meeting, as well as with regards to reading aloud the description. Is that the agenda item or just the entire resolution? Okay, and I'll be back to wrap things up in a minute.
As far as the difference between the public hearing and the public meeting, I think Joanne had it exactly on the button. The idea of a public hearing, the purpose of the hearing is for the public to provide comment to the public body for consideration. We get this question a lot because there's also a public hearing requirement of the Local Government Budget Act. And the purpose of that is so the proposed budget, it allows for commenting, and then it allows the public entity to take some consideration if they need to make amendments to the proposed budget or take it back and make some changes before they adopt it. The big difference too that we've generally counseled to people is that for the public hearing, you don't have to have a quorum of the body present, because it's as long as someone's there to receive the comments and pass it along, that's sufficient. Whereas with the meeting requires by its very definition that a quorum be present for you to take action and consider things. And so that's where we've generally looked at there being this distinction between the public hearing and the public meeting. Now, as far as reading aloud descriptions, I'm not sure the context of when this was asked, but essentially during a meeting, whoever's chairing a meeting should announce whatever agenda item is being taken up before any action is taken on it. That may be as simple as what's in the actual agenda. Now, for resolutions and ordinances, it's a pretty common practice for resolutions to read out a resolution before it's taken up so that people who may not have a copy in front of them know what's the resolutions is going to do. Ordinances, especially if you're a Larson Act municipality, reading aloud an ordinance is generally required as part of the first meeting, and then you adopt it at a subsequent meeting. And so that ordinance is generally going to be read aloud the first meeting that it's introduced. A lot of parishes and charters usually have a requirement too for ordinances, because ordinances are much more formal, that it usually has to be introduced in one meeting and then voted on at a subsequent meeting. But as far as in the meeting itself to take action, it's generally just kind of to make sure people voting in the public know where you're at in your agenda. They should read aloud, we're at agenda item this, taking action on resolution 1 or ordinance for the adoption of the millage rate. Whatever that, something so people know, okay, here's what we're actually discussing and going to vote on right now. And so that's really what the read aloud is about. It's to make sure that people know what they're voting for and what's being discussed in case there is public comment. People know to speak on what's actually up right now and not something else. Now, the last question we got is, do we need to publish the agenda in the newspaper for annual millage adoption? Your agenda, I can't speak to all the requirements that Joe would cover for her stuff about the process, but generally speaking, your agenda, as far as the 24-hour public post for open meeting law purposes, posting it physically is sufficient. Now, if it's one where it's going up for the vote of the public, remember under 4219.1, it requires that you publish no less than 20, no more than 60 days in your official journal. So that agenda, notice and agenda have to be specifically published if it's about taking action to put it on the ballot for either creating a new one or increasing and renewing an existing one for ad valorem or sales tax.
Okay.
And so I'll pass it back to Joe.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So Patrick's correct in regard to your millage adoption. If it is your actual annual millage adoption, that's up to you, the taxing district, to decide if you're going to post or publish your full meeting agenda in regard to the 24-hour requirement. So that wraps up the millage presentation, the webinar. I hope you found it useful, and you know, if you need anything, feel free to reach out to me or to our legal department. We'll be happy to help you. You have my contact information. If you can't remember that number to legal, you can always call me here at this number, and I'll be happy to put you through to them, or you can email me and we'll get you the information that you need. So thank you, and stay safe out there.